This is Luke Paulson, the Catholic Conservative, and welcome to the news of the week for February 28th, 2026. And if you enjoy these videos, do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. Patriotic Olympians, the men's and the women's Olympic hockey teams walked away with the gold. Best of all, they won against Canada.
Ironic.
Moving on, unlike many of the other athletes who decided to diminish law enforcement or even compete on behalf of another country, these players praised America and told everyone how proud they were to be American. That is why they got a special invitation. These champions were invited to the State of the Union address. Speaking of which, Democrats cannot applaud jobs. Representative Al Green was expelled early on, just like the last time President Donald Trump gave a speech before Congress. Just like how the Democrats chose not to applaud a boy who survived cancer, Democrats could not applaud anything except for banning insider trading. There's no word on whether or not Nancy Pelosi applauded. President Trump talked about how countless jobs were returning to America and how he was able to negotiate peace deals. The camera operators were, as usual, having a lot of fun. When discussing the massive fraud in the country, one operator zoomed in on Representative Ilhan Omar. Then Vice President J.D. Vance was put in charge of sniffing out the fraud. President Trump says that this and tariffs would balance the budget, but we will see about that. Throughout his speech, Omar and the rest of the Democrats insisted on heckling him for reasons. This is ironic, considering that they held a matching State of the Union and demanded that they not be heckled. Now let us highlight some of the successes of President Trump, starting with his famous Board of Peace. Board of Peace in action. President Trump's Board of Peace is already in full swing. 27 countries, mostly Islamic powers from North Africa and the Middle East, spent $1 million to join. 13 Western powers refused to join. Now at first glance, this would look bad for President Trump. However, these same nations know that he wants to end the war in Gaza by having Hamas lay down its arms. $1 million is pocket change to America, but it could be a hefty sum to a few of these countries. The calculus is simple. Billions and billions spent on weapons and tunnels to reshape the region, or $1 million to end the conflict. If peace is achieved, whole maps may have to be redrawn, but perhaps without bloodshed. As Thomas Sowell famously stated, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. I wish that there were another way. However, I would be remiss if I did not point out that the same nations that rejected President Trump's offer are major arms dealers. If there is peace, a lot of companies will lose money, and they will stop funding certain politicians. It is profits over people for some nations. Yet those on the ground know that peace is vital. It is the same reason that many crime-ridden neighborhoods are that way, because gangs control the neighborhood, not the police. Those in these neighborhoods generally only feel safe when the police are present. In the end, President Trump has negotiated multiple peace deals, and so I trust his track record. Now let us discuss the successes of his administration, starting with the work of Lee Zeldin. Cutting environmental red tape. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, officially exists to protect the natural world. However, I refer to it as the Employment Prevention Agency because it works to halt entrepreneurship. If you need any proof of this, look to the so-called phantom frog. Essentially, environmentalists decided that there is a species of frog that must be protected. Even if they cannot prove that the species is there, people cannot develop on their own private property. Many other such regulations are decided on by bureaucrats and not legislators. EPA Secretary Lee Zeldin has cut countless regulations about CO2 emissions. This makes cars much less expensive and allows the economy to flow much more smoothly. And as usual, the doomsayers are telling us that this will end the world with global warming. Global warming. Something that will kill us all, even if the models have never come to fruition, and never will. Eventually, we can stop believing Chicken Little and follow observable science. Now let us pivot from successes for President Trump to a stumbling block for President Trump. SCOTUS v. MAGA, the Supreme Court, which liberals have been claiming was bought and paid for by President Trump, struck down one of his signature moves: tariffs. 3 justices, including Justice Brett Kavanaugh, dissented. Regardless of the outcome, This is how it is supposed to work. The president makes a decision and the Supreme Court, not the dozens of district and other federal courts, issues a ruling for the president to follow. Recall that Joe Biden was vocal about defying the Supreme Court, and President Andrew Jackson reportedly defied the Supreme Court, telling them to enforce their own ruling. Coincidentally, both were Democrats. However, Justice Kavanaugh did give President Trump 3 potential options to implement tariffs. Doing so may result in Senator Chuck Schumer issuing another threat against him. Now let us move on from President Trump in America to some of the enemies of America. Silence speaks volumes. It has been proposed that the infamous Jeffrey Epstein had ties to Mossad, the intelligence arm of the modern nation of Israel. While this has supposedly been disproven, there is a huge missing chunk of Epstein emails around the era of 9/11, which the terrorists blamed on our support for Israel. We also know that we fight a lot of wars on their behalf, such as the Iraq War, and more recently, taking out Iran's nuclear reactors. It has even gotten to the point that Chunk Uygur of the Young Turks thinks that this was an inside job. One person who was in the Epstein files is the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. He was conveniently not there during the attack, and eventually got a hefty sum from the insurance payout. Is all of this connected? That, dear viewer, I let you decide. Now from an enemy of American children, we move to an enemy of California. Newsom belittles minorities. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, was on stage with a man possessing much more melanin than he. To seem relatable, Newsom said that he made a 960 on the SAT, and that he could not read a speech. This calls to mind a certain quote by Joe Biden.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Newsom later clarified that he was talking about his dyslexia, but the damage is already done. He talked about his lack of reading proficiency while trying to be relatable to a minority. If Newsom were a Republican, he would already be dragged on social media for racism. I just consider this par for the course. After all, Democrats do not even think that minorities are smart or capable enough to get a photo ID. The main reason for a voter ID that Governor Newsom probably thinks that these same Americans cannot get is to stop the illegals from voting. After all, they leave their broken country to break into ours. Mexico falls apart. While the United States had to extract Maduro, the Mexican military took out one of the leading members of one of the cartels themselves. Nemesio Oseguera, also known as El Mencho, was killed by the Mexican military on Sunday. I have no sympathy for someone like him. However, the entire country is falling apart because of it, and Americans are trying to get out. This is why we need the border wall. If this is how the criminals react when their leader is killed, imagine what they would do in America. Oh wait, we do not have to imagine it. We have Laken Riley and countless others killed by these people. Not to mention Trende Aragua, who took over an apartment building, and all of the fentanyl deaths. Despite this, I am sure that even these cartels know that if an American is harmed, this president will not waver on bringing down the hammer. However, while President Trump would take decisive action, a certain communist mayor will not. Attacking police with ICE. We all know that liberals hate Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, even though they supported President Barack Obama as the so-called deporter-in-chief. We must not forget that before they hated this branch of law enforcement, they just hated law enforcement in general. The calls to defund the police from crime-ravaged neighborhoods were a daily and ironic occurrence. Now the people of New York are taking advantage of the most liberal mayor in recent memory. With him at the helm, they can pelt law enforcement with snowballs to the point that their faces are lacerated. And so, Mayor Zohran Mamdani decided not only to deny the severity, but also to make jokes about it. Ironic. A communist would need law enforcement to confiscate the wealth, but he is throwing them to the wayside. Then again, what else would you expect of the party of rioting? Now the same people who attack law enforcement openly attack the scientific method as well. More denials of reality. With President Trump's invigorated push towards science and reality, liberal activists are stepping up to belittle science. I saw a report on my Facebook page that claimed that a man was suing a tech company. Apparently the software picked him up as a man, and this is grounds for a lawsuit. The catch is that the man has decided that he is a woman, and thus he feels the need to sue. I could not find any credible articles verifying this, but I would not doubt that someone would try. However, what is true is that it is now a crime in Switzerland to say that skeletons can only be male or female. In fact, one man was actually jailed for this. Such laws may come to America if the radical left is not stopped soon. Maybe I'm just blowing smoke. Maybe I'm completely off my rocker, but that is just my opinion. And do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. But before you go, on the left I have last week's video, but you may also enjoy the video on the right.